A determined businesswoman, Emma, crosses paths with Jason, a homeless veteran, after recognizing a military insignia on his jacket that once belonged to her missing brother, Max. Together, they embark on a journey to uncover the truth behind Max's disappearance. Jason sat quietly on a park bench, his worn-out backpack resting beside him. His once pristine military jacket, now faded and tattered, bore an insignia that hinted at a past of service and sacrifice. The early afternoon sun cast long shadows across the park, where people passed by without a second glance at the homeless man lost in his own world. For Jason, the park had become his sanctuary, a place where he could retreat from the noise of the city and the weight of his memories. As Jason closed his eyes, trying to savor a brief moment of peace, the sound of approaching footsteps broke through the quiet. Two local officers, their voices authoritative and harsh, stood in front of him. "Hey, you can't stay here," one of them barked. "This is public property, not a shelter. Move along." Jason opened his eyes slowly, his expression unreadable. He had grown used to this kind of treatment. People saw the dirt on his clothes, the scruff on his face, and dismissed him. They didn't see the scars, both physical and emotional, from his time in the service. He didn't argue. He never did. With a sigh, he began to gather his things. "Come on, you can't just sit here all day," the second officer added, impatience dripping from his tone. "People are starting to complain." Just as Jason was about to stand, a voice cut through the tension. "Is that really necessary?" A woman jogged up, her breath still heavy from running. She was dressed in athletic gear, her hair pulled back into a neat ponytail. Emma, a successful businesswoman with a sharp gaze, had been enjoying her morning routine when the scene caught her attention. The officers turned to face her, surprised by the interruption. "Ma'am, this is none of your business," the first officer said, his tone dismissive. But Emma wasn't easily brushed aside. She had noticed something that the officers hadn't, a symbol on Jason's jacket. Her eyes fixed on the military insignia stitched into the fabric. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop around her. That insignia, she recognized it. It was the same as the one her brother, Max, used to wear before he disappeared during his deployment overseas. "I just don't think he's bothering anyone," Emma continued, stepping closer to Jason, her gaze now softened with recognition. She glanced at him with a mix of curiosity and disbelief, her heart racing as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. Jason looked up at her, his tired eyes locking with hers. There was a moment of silent understanding between them, though he had no idea why this stranger was standing up for him. He just wanted to avoid more trouble. "He's not hurting anyone," Emma pressed, her voice firm yet calm. "Just let him be." After a tense pause, the officers exchanged glances. Clearly not wanting to escalate the situation further, they backed down. "Fine," the first officer muttered. "Just don't stay here all day, all right?" Jason gave a brief nod, and the officers walked away, muttering something under their breath. As they left, Emma turned back to Jason, her mind racing with questions. "Thank you," Jason said quietly, his voice rough and hoarse from days of silence. Emma shook her head, her focus still on the insignia. "Where did you get that jacket?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with an urgency she couldn't quite mask. Jason frowned, unsure of why she was asking. "It was a gift," he said, his brow furrowed. "From a buddy of mine, Max." Emma's heart skipped a beat. "Max?" she repeated, her pulse quickening. "What was his last name?" "Max Thompson," Jason replied, noticing the sudden intensity in her expression. "Why?" Emma's face drained of color, her legs feeling weak beneath her. It couldn't be a coincidence. She had spent years searching for any trace of her brother after he went missing, only to find dead ends. And now, out of nowhere, this man, a homeless stranger, was wearing Max's jacket. "I need to know more," Emma said, her voice trembling slightly. "Please, can you tell me everything you know about Max?" Jason stared at her, taken aback by her reaction. He didn't know who she was or why she cared, but something in her eyes told him that this wasn't just idle curiosity. With a slow nod, he motioned to the bench beside him. "All right," he said, But it's not a pretty story. Emma sat down beside Jason, her heart pounding in her chest. She could barely believe what she was hearing. Max, her brother, the one who had disappeared so many years ago, was connected to this man. Jason, still cautious and unsure of Emma's intentions, watched her closely as he began to recount the story. Max and I served together, Jason started, his voice low and gravelly. We weren't in the same unit at first, but we crossed paths during a joint operation overseas. He saved my life once, gave me this jacket as a reminder, said it was something to remember him by. Emma's breath caught in her throat. It was Max, without a doubt. The jacket, the insignia, the way Jason spoke about him. It all lined up. She had spent years searching for clues about what happened to her brother after he went missing. All the military could tell her was that he was MIA, and no one seemed to know more. But now, sitting next to this homeless veteran, Emma felt like she was finally on the verge of answers. What happened to him? Emma asked, trying to keep her voice steady. How did you lose contact with Max? Jason's eyes darkened, his gaze drifting as though he were staring into the past. We got caught in an ambush, he said slowly. It was chaos. Max and I got separated from the rest of the unit. We managed to survive a few days on our own in enemy territory, but things went south. He paused, as if grappling with the memories that resurfaced. Emma waited, her hands clasped tightly together, the tension almost unbearable. He was always talking about his family, Jason continued, glancing at her. Mentioned his sister a lot. Said she was the only one who really understood him. Emma's eyes welled up with tears, though she blinked them away quickly. She had been close to Max, closer than anyone in their family. They had shared everything growing up, and when he enlisted, a part of her felt like it went with him. The emptiness that followed his disappearance had haunted her ever since. After the ambush, Jason continued, we found some shelter, but Max, he was different. Kept saying he had to get out of the military, that something was wrong, something bigger than us. He gave me the jacket before we split up. I thought it was just a precaution, that we'd meet again once things calmed down. Emma's heart sank. Did he ever tell you what he was running from? Why he wanted to disappear? Jason shook his head, his brow furrowed in thought. No, not directly, but he said he had seen something that scared him enough to want to leave everything behind. He was serious about it. That's the last I saw of him. I tried to find him after the war, but I ended up here. Emma took a deep breath, trying to process the weight of Jason's words. Max hadn't just gone missing. He had intentionally disappeared, and it had something to do with what he had seen during his deployment. The military must have known something, but they had kept her in the dark all these years. I need to find him, Emma said, her voice filled with determination. He's still out there, I know it. Jason gave her a long, measured look. I'm not sure if that's possible, he said carefully. Max didn't want to be found. Emma shook her head, resolve hardening in her chest. I can't just let it go, Jason. You might be the only connection I have left to him. There was a heavy silence between them. Jason could see the desperation in Emma's eyes, the same kind of desperation he had felt when he first returned home from the war and tried to pick up the pieces of his broken life. He didn't want to get involved, didn't want to dredge up painful memories, but something about Emma's determination reminded him of Max, the way her eyes burned with the same fierce loyalty he had seen in her brother. Look, Jason finally said, rubbing the back of his neck, I'm not sure I can help, but I owe Max. If you really want to find him, I'll do what I can. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Thank you, she said softly. I'll do whatever it takes. Jason nodded, though uncertainty lingered in his eyes. I know some people, veterans who might have heard something, seen something. They've got their own networks, places that aren't exactly easy to track. If Max is hiding, someone might know where. Emma nodded, feeling a surge of hope. I can help. I have resources, connections that could get us information faster. That'll help, Jason agreed, though there was a trace of doubt in his voice. But you have to be ready for whatever we find. Max may not be the same person you remember. Emma swallowed hard, her stomach churning at the thought. I just want to know that he's okay. Jason gave her a long, searching look, then sighed. All right, We'll start asking around. There's a town up north, Cedar Hills. Heard whispers that some veterans go there to disappear. It's off the grid, quiet. Maybe we'll find something there. Cedar Hills? Emma repeated, already planning their next move. We'll go there. Together. Jason hesitated for a moment before giving a slow nod. Together. The next morning, Emma and Jason were on the road, heading toward Cedar Hills, a small town nestled in the mountains. The drive was long and quiet, the tension between them palpable. Emma, behind the wheel, was lost in thought, her mind racing with possibilities. Was her brother really out there, hiding? What had he seen that drove him to disappear from their lives? She gripped the steering wheel tighter, determination fueling her every move. Jason sat in the passenger seat, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, but his mind was miles away. Memories of his time with Max surfaced, clouding his thoughts. The guilt of losing his friend, of not doing more, weighed heavily on him. Now, with Emma by his side, he wondered if they were chasing ghosts or if Max was truly within reach. As the hours passed, they began to climb the winding roads that led to Cedar Hills. The town was isolated, surrounded by dense forests and towering mountains. It was the kind of place where people went when they wanted to disappear. Jason knew it well. Many veterans like him sought out places like this, far from the chaos of the world they had once known. For Emma, it was both daunting and hopeful. This secluded town might be the key to unlocking the mystery of her brother's disappearance. Finally, they arrived. Cedar Hills was quiet, almost unnervingly so. The streets were lined with old wooden houses, a few small shops, and a gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. Emma parked the car near the local diner, a weathered building with a neon sign flickering in and out. The silence of the town settled around them like a heavy blanket. This place, it's like time forgot it, Emma said softly, stepping out of the car and looking around. It's perfect for someone who wants to disappear. Jason nodded in agreement. A lot of guys from the service end up in places like this. No questions, no expectations. Just quiet. Emma's stomach twisted. The thought of Max hiding here, alone and struggling, made her feel both desperate and determined. We need to ask around, she said. Someone here must know something. They headed into the diner, the bell above the door jingling as they entered. The interior was dimly lit, with a few scattered patrons sitting at booths, sipping coffee. Behind the counter, an older woman with kind but tired eyes glanced up from her work. Jason led the way, moving toward the counter with a sense of familiarity. Coffee? The woman asked, her voice raspy but warm. Jason nodded. Yeah, two, please. He hesitated for a moment, then leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. We're looking for someone. A friend of mine, Max Thompson. He might have come through here. The woman's eyes flickered with recognition, but she quickly masked it, pouring the coffee as if the question meant nothing. A lot of folks come through here, she said, her tone neutral. Why were you looking for him? Emma stepped forward, her voice tense with emotion. He's my brother. He's been missing for years, and I think he might be living around here. The woman paused, her hand hovering over the coffee pot. She studied Emma for a long moment, her eyes softening. Max, huh? She said quietly, setting the pot down. He doesn't go by that name anymore, but yeah, he's here. Works over at the garage. But I'll tell you now, he's not the same man you remember. Emma's heart raced, her breath catching in her throat. He's here? He's alive? The woman nodded, giving Emma a look of both sympathy and caution. He's been through a lot. You should know that before you go looking for him. People come to Cedar Hills for peace, not for visitors. Jason, sensing Emma's growing anxiety, placed a hand on her shoulder. We're not here to stir things up. We just need to see him. The woman sighed, glancing between the two of them before finally nodding. All right. The garage is a few blocks down, on Maple Street. Just be careful with him. He's fragile. Thank you, Emma whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. She felt closer to Max than she had in years, yet the thought of what she might find scared her. What if he didn't want to see her? What if he was beyond saving? As they left the diner, the tension between them thickened. Jason could see the worry etched across Emma's face. "You ready for this?" he asked quietly. Emma swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she gripped the car keys. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've imagined this moment for so long. But what if he doesn't want to see me? What if he's not the Max I remember?" Jason looked at her, his expression unreadable. "He's your brother. No matter what's happened, that hasn't changed. Just give him a chance to explain." Emma nodded, though her mind was still swirling with uncertainty. Together, they made their way to the garage, a small, run-down building with a faded sign that read Henderson's Auto Repair. The sound of clanking tools and the hum of machinery echoed from inside. Emma's heart raced as she stepped forward, each footfall heavier than the last. Inside the garage, the smell of oil and gasoline filled the air. A man was hunched over an engine, his back turned to them. His frame was familiar, taller than she remembered, broader. But something about the way he moved, the way he worked with such quiet precision, sent a jolt of recognition through Emma. Jason spoke first, his voice tentative. "Max?" The man froze, the wrench slipping from his hand and clattering to the floor. Slowly, he turned around, wiping his hands on a rag. His face was older, worn from years of hardship, but his eyes, the same eyes that Emma had looked into as a child, stared back at her, filled with shock and disbelief. "Emma?" His voice was barely a whisper, as if saying her name was too painful to bear. Emma's breath hitched, tears welling in her eyes. "Max, I've been looking for you for so long." Max looked between Emma and Jason, his expression a mixture of guilt, fear, and something else she couldn't quite place. He took a step back, shaking his head. "You shouldn't have come here." Emma stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Why? What happened to you? Why did you leave us?" Max ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. "You don't understand. I couldn't stay. I couldn't put you in danger." "In danger?" Emma repeated, her mind spinning. "Max, what are you talking about?" Max sighed heavily, leaning against the workbench, his face drawn with exhaustion. "I found out something during the war. It wasn't just PTSD, Emma. I was involved in something bigger. I saw things I wasn't supposed to see. People are looking for me. That's why I disappeared. I didn't want you or anyone else getting caught up in it." Emma stood frozen, the weight of his words sinking in. "Max, you didn't have to go through this alone. We could have helped you. I could have helped you." "You don't get it," Max said, his voice rising with frustration. "The people who are after me, they don't care who they hurt. If they knew you were looking for me, they'd come after you too." Jason, who had been silently watching, stepped forward. "Max, we're not going anywhere. Emma's risked too much to find you. Whatever you're running from, we can help." Max's eyes flicked toward Jason, then back to Emma. There was a long, tense silence before he spoke again, his voice barely audible. "It's too late for that." The weight of Max's words hung heavy in the air, suffocating the small space in the garage. Emma stared at her brother, trying to comprehend everything he had just said. This wasn't the reunion she had imagined for so many years. Max, her brother, the man she had admired and loved, wasn't just struggling with the aftermath of war. He was hiding from something far more dangerous. Jason stepped forward, his posture tense but controlled. "Max, if you're in trouble, we need to know what we're up against. We can't help you if we don't know the full story." Max hesitated, glancing between them. His hands trembled slightly as he rubbed the back of his neck, clearly torn. Emma stepped closer, her voice softer, pleading. "Max, please. You've been gone for so long, and I need to know what happened. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." Max sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He could see the determination in his sister's eyes, the same fire that had always burned in her. "All right," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not what you think. It's worse." Emma and Jason exchanged a glance as Max motioned for them to sit down on a bench against the wall. He leaned back against the workbench, his face etched with exhaustion as he began to speak. "It all started during my last tour," Max began, his voice steady but laden with the weight of old memories. "We were deployed in a remote area, conducting routine patrols, Or at least that's what we thought. But then we started seeing things that didn't add up. Orders came down that didn't make sense. Operations that seemed unnecessary, even dangerous. He paused, his brow furrowed as he recalled the details. One night, we were sent on a classified mission. We weren't told much, just that we needed to secure some assets from a facility. But when we got there, it wasn't what we expected. It wasn't just a facility. It was a research lab, and the things we found inside. Max trailed off, his face pale, as if the very memory haunted him. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. "What did you see, Max?" Max swallowed hard, his eyes flickering with fear. They were experimenting on people, Emma, civilians, locals. I don't know exactly what they were doing, but whatever it wasn't right. I saw men, good men, turn into something else after they were exposed to whatever the hell they were working on. It was like they weren't human anymore. Jason frowned, his military training kicking in as he processed the information. "Are you saying they were testing chemical weapons?" "Maybe," Max replied, shaking his head, but it felt bigger than that. It was as if the whole operation was off the books. No oversight, no accountability. The higher-ups were involved, but no one was talking. When we got back, I tried to report what I saw, tried to do the right thing. That's when everything fell apart. Emma felt a chill crawl up her spine. "What happened?" "They started coming after me," Max continued, his voice filled with bitterness. "I became a target. People I worked with started disappearing, getting reassigned, or suddenly dying in accidents. I knew it was only a matter of time before they came for me too. That's why I left. I couldn't risk staying in one place for too long. I couldn't let them hurt anyone close to me, especially you." Emma's heart ached at the thought of her brother, isolated and alone, living in constant fear. "Max, we could have helped you. You didn't have to disappear like that." Max met her gaze, the guilt clear in his eyes. "I thought I was protecting you. I didn't want you to become a target too. These people, they don't care who they hurt." Jason crossed his arms, his face tense with thought. "So, you've been running all this time. How did you end up here?" Max shrugged, his expression tired. "I figured Cedar Hills was remote enough. People don't ask questions here, and it's quiet. I can lay low, do my work at the garage, and no one notices me. I thought I'd stay off the radar." Emma couldn't hold back her frustration any longer. "But what kind of life is this, Max? Hiding in a town no one's heard of, waiting for something terrible to happen? You deserve better than this. We can find a way to fix this, to stop these people." Max shook his head, his face filled with resignation. "You don't understand, Emma. These people are powerful. They control everything, military, government, even private contractors. I've tried to expose them before, and every time I get close, they shut me down. If I try again, I don't know what they'll do." Jason, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. "Then we don't let them shut you down. You've been in survival mode for too long, Max. You've got allies now." Emma's right. There's still a way out of this. Max looked at Jason, surprised by the man's conviction. "What are you suggesting?" "We go public," Jason replied firmly. "We gather as much evidence as we can and take it to the right people, journalists, whistleblower groups. There are legal teams out there who handle cases like this. If these people are as dangerous as you say, the more public this goes, the harder it'll be for them to cover it up." Emma nodded, her heart swelling with hope. "I know a lawyer, someone I trust. She's helped with cases like this before. If we can get enough evidence, we can protect you. We can fight back." Max looked away, his expression torn. "I don't know if I can face all that again." "You don't have to do it alone," Emma said, her voice soft but firm. "We're in this together, Max. You're my brother. I won't let you go through this alone again." Max's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, Emma saw the exhaustion, the years of running and hiding that had drained the life out of him. He had been strong for so long, but now, facing his sister and the possibility of help, he seemed ready to collapse under the weight of it all. Jason, sensing the moment, stepped closer. "We'll start small," he said gently. "First, we gather the evidence. We contact Emma's lawyer. We keep you safe, one step at a time." Max stared at them, the fear and uncertainty swirling in his eyes. But beneath it all, there was something else, something Emma hadn't seen in years. Hope. After a long pause, Max nodded. "All right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let's do it." Later that night, Emma and Jason sat in a small motel room just outside Cedar Hills, their minds racing with the gravity of what they had uncovered. Max was staying in the garage for now, too afraid to leave his hiding spot, but Emma felt a sense of relief knowing they had a plan. They had made contact with Emma's lawyer, who had promised to help them navigate the complex legal and investigative steps they would need to take. But Emma knew the fight was only just beginning. Jason broke the silence, his voice low and thoughtful. "You know, Max isn't the only one who needs saving. This whole thing, everything he's been through, it's bigger than just him." Emma nodded, her eyes weary but determined. "I know, but we're going to bring him back, whatever it takes." The next few weeks were a blur of tense phone calls, secret meetings, and meticulous planning. Emma, Jason, and Max worked tirelessly to piece together the fragments of Max's story. Emma's lawyer, Sophia, a sharp, no-nonsense advocate for whistleblowers, began pulling strings, using her contacts to get the right people involved. Slowly, they built a case, gathering classified documents, testimonies from fellow soldiers who had witnessed the same horrors Max described, and connecting the dots between powerful figures in the military and private sectors. But with each step forward, the threat looming over them grew more tangible. Strange cars appeared outside their motel, and phones rang late at night with no one on the other end. It was clear that whoever was after Max hadn't forgotten about him. Despite the risks, Emma pushed ahead, determined to protect her brother and bring those responsible to justice. Late one evening, in the dim glow of the motel room, Max sat on the edge of his bed, his hands trembling as he stared at the floor. He had spent years hiding, constantly on the move, and now, he was on the verge of exposing everything. The weight of it all seemed to crush him, and Emma could see it. "Max," she said softly, sitting beside him, "you don't have to carry this alone anymore. We're doing this together." Max looked up at her, his eyes filled with exhaustion and gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you for this, Emma. I thought I'd lost you, lost everything." Emma placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice firm. "You didn't lose me. You never will." Jason, sitting in the corner of the room, chimed in, "And you've got more people on your side than you realize. We're not backing down now." Max nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in years, he felt like he could breathe again, even with danger closing in around them. A few days later, everything came to a head. With Sophia's help, they managed to get a major investigative journalist on board. The journalist, who had a reputation for exposing government corruption, was eager to break the story wide open. They arranged a meeting in a safe location, far from Cedar Hills, where Max could provide his testimony and hand over the evidence they had collected. It was a risky move. Once Max's story went public, the people after him would have no choice but to escalate their efforts to silence him. But they all agreed. It was the only way forward. The night before the meeting, tension filled the air. Max was quiet, staring out the window of the safe house they had rented, his mind undoubtedly racing with thoughts of what could happen next. Emma joined him, her heart aching at the sight of her brother so weighed down by fear and uncertainty. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly, trying to reassure him. Max let out a long breath, not turning to look at her. "I just don't know what comes next, Emma. I've been running for so long. I don't know how to stop." Emma's voice was firm, filled with the conviction she had held onto since the beginning. "We stop by facing it head-on, by exposing the truth. Once this is out there, they can't keep hiding." Max nodded slowly, his fingers tightening on the window frame. "And after that? We'll figure it out," Emma promised. Together. The day of the meeting arrived, and with it, a storm of emotions. Emma, Jason, Max, and Sophia arrived at the agreed location. A quiet, secluded cabin in the woods, far from prying eyes. The journalist arrived soon after, his camera crew discreet but ready to capture Max's testimony. As the interview began, Max recounted everything: the mission, the experiments, the men who had died or disappeared, and the forces that had come after him when he tried to blow the whistle. His voice wavered at times, the memories painful and raw, but he pushed through, driven by the need to finally put everything out in the open. When it was over, the journalist stood, shaking Max's hand firmly. "This is going to change everything," he said. "We'll make sure the world hears your story." Max watched as the crew packed up, a sense of finality settling over him. The weight of the past years, the fear, the running, began to lift. He didn't know what would happen next, but for the first time, he felt like he wasn't trapped in the shadows anymore. Days passed, and then the story broke. It spread like wildfire across news outlets and social media, igniting a storm of outrage and investigations. As the details of the illegal experiments and the cover-ups were exposed, the people responsible scrambled to contain the fallout. Government agencies launched inquiries, and whistleblower protection groups rallied around Max, ensuring his safety as the threats against him intensified. But despite the danger, Max no longer felt like a man on the run. He had his sister, he had Jason, and he had the truth on his side. Months later, the dust began to settle. The investigation into the military operations continued, but Max, with Sophia's help, had secured a legal team that ensured his safety. He moved into a small house near Emma, no longer hiding, but slowly rebuilding his life. For Emma, the reunion with her brother had brought her both relief and a sense of closure she hadn't expected. Max would never be the same carefree brother she had once known, but they were healing together, each day a step closer to mending the bond that had been torn apart by years of distance and fear. Jason, too, had found a new purpose. Having faced his own demons during their journey, he now worked with Emma and Max to help other veterans struggling with the aftermath of war. Together, they opened a support center in the city, offering counseling, resources, and a safe space for veterans to reintegrate into society. A place where no one would be left to fight their battles alone. One afternoon, Max stood outside the center, watching as a group of veterans gathered inside. Jason was leading a meeting, and Emma was working with volunteers in the background. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the building. For the first time in years, Max felt something close to peace. He wasn't running anymore. He had faced his past, exposed the truth, and found his way back to the people who mattered most. As Emma stepped outside to join him, Max smiled softly. "We did it." Emma nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "Yeah, we did." And together, they watched the sun dip below the horizon, knowing that, while the road ahead would still have its challenges, they would face it as a family, stronger than ever.